I'm definitely a huge proponent of some kind of massive wealth tax on anybody with more than $1 billion or something like that. I don't see a need for society to have, that people that rich. We have, I think 4,000 billionaires in the world or some crazy amount like that. It's just insane. And, it's more money than they could ever spend in a lifetime on anything necessary for their own personal happiness or joy or whatever it might be. And that money could definitely be put to use in many ways. So
I think
that's again part of, redistributing it.
If you wanted to make it a bit more acceptable to libertarian type people, you could make exceptions. It depends on what they're using the money on. Like there could be ways in which they spend the money that's free of tax. So that like an intentional loophole, but the loophole would be okay, if you actually use that money to invest into environmental technologies or into a building space infrastructure or so whatever it is at the moment that the civilization could really benefit from, but it's a very costly, very ambitious project, like a mega structures in space type thing, then you could give them just that's a part of the way how you would just point them in the direction beneficial for the whole of civilization.
Yeah, I actually love that. I love the idea of kind of taxing luxuries, right? Where you tax any house worth more than whatever $10 million or something. That it's just unnecessary, especially guys with 10 or 15 houses all around the world. They don't really need that. I mean, even Elon Musk, he only had a $50,000. You had one of those building pods that's he's living in that in Texas, one of those build-a-box homes, just to kind of prove that it was doable. So I love the idea of just taxing them on their luxury items, whatever their yachts are. Those are the things we don't really need for society. And as long as they're paying, very high taxes, whether it's 50% or 90%, as much as you can get away with, really, because then that's a great thing. But if the money is being used, like you said, for providing jobs, good jobs that society needs, then it's definitely not a bad thing that they have.
It doesn't have to be
innovation,
just specifically convertible into jobs, especially if you then have universal basic income equivalent, where that's not really the big issue anymore, because there's no reason why jobs should be something as a concept that is dominating everybody's lives, because that's a construct. That's a social construct, one type of relations, economic relations in which a person can exist in a society. You can have a different model where then what you care more about are in the information economy type problems, which includes developing new technologies or building more advanced infrastructures.
Yeah, I use the word jobs because that's what most people are familiar with, but it's really more about purpose. If they can give people purpose and, like you said, help them innovate, help them educate, help them make the world better, then that's a great use for that money. It's a great use for those billions. Any part of those billions that's actually building good things that society needs, we wouldn't necessarily need or even want to tax if it's doing good things for us. So it's how many dollars does society get back out of it? Every dollar they put in. Same with healthcare. If every dollar you put into preventative medicine, you maybe save $7 down the road of reactive medicine.
Yeah, I know. It's I personally, I'm not very of all the intellectual subjects, I'm essentially the least interested in economics, by nature. I'm very much interested in all the more fun problems, but I do acknowledge that you can solve a lot of real stuff with economic solutions, and that's why one of the things I would recommend, if you don't know about it, is actually the I guess only Czech book about economics that there's at any point in reading, from the only thinker that's this bears mentioning of the Czech modern social scientist, is Tomáš Sedláček, who wrote I think it's called The Economics of Good and Evil, or something to that effect, where he makes his big argument is that it's a mistake of most economists to try to, doesn't have to be a mistake, it could be intentional obfuscation of what's really important, but a mistake is to treat economics as just some sort of math problem, because it's not just about calculating things. If you look at the basic concept in economics, goods, it's derived from the word good. So it's the whole point is the clue is in the title. It's all about deciding what a good life is and what are the good things in life. And then the economics is some sort of an equation of how to get more of what's good in the society. That's the whole point and purpose. true point and purpose of economics. So it's about all the qualitative debates about definitions of goods, of things that are worth pursuing or maximizing. So it's not just about like, look, I made the number bigger. That's meaningless unless what that means is, and this is how it improves this qualitative good thing, makes it more available or makes it more advanced or makes everyone's lives happier or something to that effect. And then like the big debates should be or would always have to be about the values. Like, okay, so what is actually the good thing that we could try to be maximizing in the society?
Right.
But you still that economics ultimately should be about like the philosophy of good things in life.
Yeah, absolutely.
That should be.
I love the summary of maximizing freedom of every individual without giving them the freedom to hurt or enslave. Right. I think that's one of my key mission statements with everything I do is, and it's kind of a good libertarian argument because everything they kind of go when I talk about it, I'm for that. I'm kind of a libertarian as long as you're dealing with pollution, you're dealing with poverty, you're dealing with terrorism, right? You're dealing with oppression. But the libertarians don't typically focus on that much. They have a little bit there, but they mostly just hope that the invisible hand will deal with that. But it really, historically, it hasn't.
And always claim that
it won't deal with things.
And always claim that state doing it must be terrible. Which is like, I get that. Like a lot of their arguments do make sense in that, like, there are definitely things that the market solves pretty well. And there are problems that governments have when they try to do stuff. But also then you look at like some of the bigger accomplishments of governments that actually tried to help people in the world, and you see that some of them like really work quite well. And I'm really not convinced that a purely libertarian system would be able to provide them, because mainly not because it couldn't in any scenario, but maybe it wouldn't care. Because like in the libertarian system, there's no guarantee that anybody will, like enough people will decide that something actually has to be done. And with some things like healthcare, it's really kind of obvious that like you kind of have to do it to have like, or if you do it, it is better.
For the biggest problem with all of that is it doesn't really factor in the abuse of the commons much. You know, they allow people to kind of sue someone if you pollute their land or something, because that's what the corporations do. But it's very hard to do that. And unless you have good policies worldwide and good controls worldwide that only a government really could do, something as simple as throwing plastic in the ocean. I mean, how do you ever manage that if it's not a global, governmental effort to clean up the oceans? It's just corporations aren't incentivized to do that.
There was this one young guy, I'm not sure if you know about the project. I never remember his name. Kind of blank on a lot of names when we're doing the podcast. Hopefully we'll be able to fix that with some like video clips put in there on YouTube. There's a guy who essentially he was like a high school or early college student who devised the technology to clean up the plastic from the ocean, especially from the large patches. Yeah,
I saw that. That's the big snake thing that sits in the water and I did on that. It is very cool.
So I think the thing is that like essentially when he proposed, like ever since he proposed the idea, like everyone gave him money on that.
Yeah, so it was kind of a donation-based thing. It was pretty cool. It's a good example.
So like that's like a way how they libertarians would say it will be solved. Like if it's a big enough problem, somebody will care who will develop the technology, and then again, if enough people care, they will give him the person the resource.
It just seems like it might be too slow sometimes. It has to be a really big problem, particularly climate change, because by the time climate change is obvious enough to everyone, it's probably too late. So we have to rely on the governments and the worldwide organizations to tell us beforehand, yes, this is a major problem. You guys should worry about this now. In the same way we kind of rely on them for disease control to some extent. If there's a plague around the world, it might be too slow counting on individuals and whatever to spread the word. You kind of have to count on some World Health Organization to spread the word and say, hey, here's a vaccine we've developed, or here's a cure for this plague we've developed.
There are
The libertarian philosophy just does not deal with that at the same speed or the same level, I don't think.
Yeah, there are definitely, because I do essentially do largely agree with there being institutions that have special reasons to have higher authority on some problems than most people, because markets are inherently democratic if they are actually free markets and not just some oligarchy and sort of puppet show. If they're actually free markets, then most people, most of the time, do understand their issues and needs well enough that most of their market choices, again, in a system that's not oligarchic and actually skewed, or like that doesn't care about externalities or yada yada. But like most of the time, the choices will create something that is ultimately better for most people and more efficient, and like more goods and better goods being provided to people more easily than what like a communist 5-year plan from a centralized government would come up with. But then you have something like scientific institutions, which do know better. Like I have a bunch of issues with skeptics, and like they like overestimate how much they know and how well they know it and how great critical thinkers they are a lot of the time. But they are more likely to be correct about certain problems, especially like the big environmental unprecedented types of problems, than the general public. So that's the sort of same model or argument why a government could be better, like in a sense of like the argument like between direct democracy and indirect representatives. It's like, why should you want to have indirect representatives? Is that the issues need to be dealt with by experts. Like people can be trusted enough to like select people. It's all arguable, but I guess you can argue that people could be good enough judges of like who should be representing them. But then the person representing them should have the like executive veto essentially over like, okay, what we're actually going to do, because most of the people it's not their job to understand things and to be informed and to like they should try, but they won't be as expert as like, I don't know, epidemiologist. So there's just of course the opposite problem of like the elites have their own issues that have to be dealt with, like if they get like too full of themselves or that they may have authoritarian tendencies, and those are like some of the negative aspects of government, centralized control. But so we have to try to mitigate both of the extremes, both of the types of problems. But ultimately, it will always be certain kinds of elites or authorities will know better about certain issues that like in a fully libertarian society just wouldn't get addressed until they're really bad.
Yeah, and the other major thing, it doesn't really deal that well with monopolies or, cartels of any kind, right? A libertarian system says, we don't need to restrict the monopolies. They can rule everything. And eventually, the whole Adam Smith economics thing, it was based on the idea that there was essentially infinite land. Infinite. If you didn't like somebody or if you needed some land, you just go off into the wild, put down your stake on your land and start growing your potatoes, right? It just assumed that you could always leave and build up your company somewhere else. You could always claim something. You'd have water, you'd have land, you could build your company from that. But even then you would just ignore that you're taking it away from the natives. Yeah, exactly. You just ignore that. So that the whole libertarian philosophy is essentially built up from that concept that there's infinite number of resources and land, and we can all just develop it as much as we can, as best as we can, and let anything go, and then we'll regulate ourselves. But as soon as you have, finite land, and all the good land has essentially been taken or claimed, and then you essentially, especially as you play the game of Monopoly, and you only have, say, 1,000 or 1 million people that own 99% of the land and resources, then what does everybody else do? They literally are, for the rest of time, enslaved to the monopolies and cartels, and there's nothing they can do to get land.
Until they escape to the new world, because that was precisely the difference was between the old world and the new world, is that the old world was already all taken up and all like divided and claimed. Of course, the new world was also inhabited, and there's like very unfortunate history of like what happened there. But in principle, if you take it like sort of libertarian philosophy, makes more sense in like growth expansion phases of civilization, and it could make sense if we expand into space some more, because then you can like treat again resources as sort of infinite for a bit until you run into the new limitation and everything's taken up again. So I definitely am of the mind that most of the philosophies that claim they are the best always, they are usually applicable or the best in a particular situation. And so what irritates me is people like who are proponents of essentially any ism are completely unable to recognize that sometimes, somewhere, it's a different ism that's needed. They will always keep claiming that no matter how situation changed, it always was the greatest, is the greatest, and shall be the greatest. So with, like, for instance, the pure libertarianism, how to deal with some issues with monopolies, for instance, like I've mentioned last time, Urza, the main Czech libertarian thinker. He's actually, I think even on the world level, is like pretty good, like thinker and debater. So he argues that every system tends toward monopoly, and his argument always in the most like extreme cases where the libertarianism isn't obviously the best, he always defaults to the kind of argument that, but other systems also tend to it, and it would probably be worse in the other systems. So like you could say, like, we now don't have perfect libertarianism, but look, there are still monopolies or near monopolies. Like you could say they should be government regulated, but then he would say, but government is a monopoly. In a sense, and it's like, yes, you can like debate in this way till the cows go home, but what the phrase is. But the thing is, in these issues, I think it's a little bit disingenuous to never cede any ground and never recognize that something else has worked in some other situation, and that the system that you have probably would be better if it was at least combined with something else a little bit, and not just the purest form of it.
Well, I do like that how humanism is essentially the best of all these other isms, right? To say something is humanist is basically a very broad, open-minded concept that if it's good for humanity, it comes back to that word good. Anything that's good for humanity is a great thing, and let's push forward and learn from it, right? Let's not close our minds to any of these isms. Let's open up to all the humanisms.